He stood in the saloon doorway like a man with nothing left to lose. Dust clung to his boots. Pine needles were caught in the hem of his coat. His shoulders were wide, his beard rough, his face marked by wind and work. He did not look like a man asking for anything. He looked like a man built to survive alone. "I need a wife by tomorrow," he said. The room exploded with laughter. Wyoming Territory, 1874, did not reward bold requests made without polish. Aspen Bend was a small town carved between mountains and river. A general store, a livery stable, a church that doubled as a courthouse, and a saloon that held more opinions than whiskey. About 60 families lived within riding distance. Everyone knew everyone, and everyone was watching him now. Josiah Cade did not laugh with them, yet he was 41 years old and had lived 16 of those years alone in the high mountains above town. He trapped, hunted, cut timber, and came down twice a year to trade. He was not unfriendly. He was simply unused to people. Social words felt foreign in his mouth. But this was not about comfort. 3 weeks earlier, he had found 2 children on the mountain road. A wagon stopped, horses still harnessed. Inside the wagon were their parents, taken by fever. The boy was 7. The girl was 5. They sat in the dirt beside the wheel, silent, still. He had brought them home because leaving them was not an option. Now the territorial judge was arriving in the morning. If Josiah could not prove he had a proper home with a wife, the children would be sent east on the orphan train, processed like cargo, lost to him forever. So he stood in the saloon and let the town laugh. A man at the bar joked about his beard. Another shouted that even a blind bride would refuse him. A woman near the piano laughed and said she would rather marry the piano. Josiah waited. He had spent winters watching storms exhaust themselves against rock. He knew noise faded if you did not feed it. When the laughter slowed, he spoke again. "There are 2 children," he said. "They lost their parents on the mountain road. I have been caring for them. The judge comes tomorrow. If I do not have a wife, they will be taken." Silence replaced laughter. He did not beg loudly. He did not perform. His voice was rough and honest. "I am not asking for love. I am asking for a woman willing to stand beside me in front of a judge so those children do not lose their home again." The room shifted. Men stared into their drinks. Boots scraped the floor. The weight of what he said settled over them. Then a chair moved. At the back of the saloon sat a woman few noticed. Dark hair pulled back, plain blue dress, coffee instead of whiskey. She had been in Aspen Bend 4 months, working quietly at the boarding house. Her name was Edith Sullivan. 2 years earlier, she had buried her husband and her son after cholera swept through her old town. She had come west, not chasing hope, but distance. Distance from graves. Distance from rooms that echoed. She stood up. The sound of the chair against wood cut through the silence. She walked toward Josiah slowly. Not dramatic, not rushed. Certain, but as she stopped in front of him and looked up, he was taller by a full head. His beard was rough, his hands scarred, his coat worn thin. But his eyes were pale blue and gentle in a way that did not match the rest of him. "I have one question," she said. "Ask it," he replied. "Will you be kind to them?" The words were small, but they landed like thunder. She did not ask about money. She did not ask about land. She did not ask about comfort. She asked about kindness. Josiah swallowed. "I have been kind," he said. "I fed them. I gave them my bed. I held the girl when she cried in her sleep. I taught the boy to stack wood because he wanted to help. His hands opened at his sides. I do not have money. I cut my own hair with a knife. I talk to my horses more than people. But I will be kind to them. And to you. Every day. Edith searched his eyes. She did not look at the beard or the broken nose. She looked at what was behind them. Then she nodded. Then I will marry you, Mr. Cade. The room did not laugh this time. The next morning in the church that doubled as a courthouse, Judge Whitfield married them and granted custody in the same breath. Frontier efficiency at its finest. Gabriel, the boy, stood beside Josiah holding a borrowed ring. Lily, the girl, stood beside Edith holding her rag doll like a witness. By noon, they were riding back up the mountain together. Edith sat beside Josiah in the wagon. The children rode in the back. The mountain road was steep, but no one hurried. There was nowhere else they needed to be. When they reached the cabin, Edith stepped down and studied it. Rough walls, smoke-stained roof, as solid beams shaped by careful hands. It needs curtains, she said. I do not own curtains, Josiah replied. You do now, she said. She had packed fabric. Inside, she placed a small photograph of her son on the mantel without explanation. Josiah did not ask. Some things were sacred. Days turned to weeks. Edith brought rhythm to the cabin. Meals appeared at regular hours. Windows gained curtains. The space softened. One Tuesday in November, Lily placed her rag doll on Edith's knee and whispered her first word since the mountain road. Mama. Edith froze. The word filled the cabin with light. She lifted the girl into her arms and held her tight, not crying loudly, just breathing through something that had been broken and was now mending. Josiah stood in the doorway watching. What he understood then, that this cabin had become a home, not because of walls or wood, but because of a question asked in a saloon. Will you be kind? And a promise made without pride. He had walked into town desperate. He walked back up the mountain with a wife, 2 children, and something he had never known before. A family. Winter came early to the mountains above Aspen Bend. The first snow fell in thick white sheets that covered the cabin roof and buried the path to the woodpile. The air turned sharp and thin. Wind pressed against the walls at night like it was testing their strength. Inside the cabin, life moved forward. Edith woke before sunrise each morning. She kept the fire steady and the kettle warm. She learned the rhythm of mountain living the way she learned everything else, quietly and without complaint. And she patched torn coats, baked bread from rough flour, and planted hope in small daily tasks. Josiah watched her the way a man watches something rare. He had built the cabin with his hands, but she built the life inside it. Gabriel followed Josiah everywhere. The boy still spoke little, but his silence no longer felt heavy. It felt thoughtful. He carried wood twice his size and insisted on helping with the traps. Josiah never told him no. A boy who had lost his father needed to feel useful. Lily stayed close to Edith. She talked now, constantly. Words poured from her as if she were making up for years of quiet. She followed Edith from stove to table, asking questions about everything. Why snow falls? Why birds leave? Why some days feel sad, even when nothing is wrong? Edith answered each question with patience. But the town of Aspen Bend kept watching. People remembered that night in the saloon. Some were ashamed of their laughter. Others were curious. A few were doubtful. They waited for the arrangement to fail. Marriage born from need was not something most trusted. One Saturday, Josiah brought the family down to town for supplies. The wagon rolled into Aspen Bend slower than before, not because of the road, but because Josiah was aware of the eyes waiting. Edith sat beside him, calm. Gabriel and Lily rode in the back, bundled in blankets. When they stopped outside the general store, Mrs. Calloway stepped out onto the porch. "Well," she said, hands on her hips, "looks like the mountain man learned how to build a family." Edith smiled politely. Inside the store, whispers followed them between the shelves. A man muttered that marriages made in a day rarely last a year. A woman questioned whether a widow should move so quickly. Edith heard it all. Josiah heard it too. He felt something rise in his chest. Not anger. Not exactly. Something protective. He turned to speak, but Edith touched his arm gently. "It is all right," she said softly. "We know the truth." That night back at the cabin, snowstorm winds rattled the shutters. The fire burned low. The children slept in the loft above. Josiah sat at the table, staring at his hands. "I am not what you deserve," he said quietly. Edith looked up from her sewing. "You deserved someone who knew how to be a husband," he continued. "I do not know the right words. I do not know how to sit at a table and talk proper. I have lived alone too long." Edith set the needle down. I did not marry you for polished words," she said. "I married you because you are kind." He looked at her then. The firelight softened her face. "Kindness is not weakness," she added. "It is strength most people do not have." The wind howled outside. Inside, something steadier grew. In late January, trouble came. Gabriel fell through thin ice at the edge of the river while checking a trap with Josiah. The water was fast and cruel. Josiah pulled him out within seconds, but by the time they reached the cabin, the boy was shaking uncontrollably. Edith moved quickly. Blankets, dry clothes, warm broth. She held Gabriel close as his body trembled. Josiah stood nearby, feeling helpless, in a way he had not felt since the saloon. Through the night they took turns sitting beside the boy. Snow pounded the roof, while Lily cried quietly from the loft until Edith reassured her. By morning, Gabriel's fever broke. Josiah stepped outside into the freezing dawn and dropped to his knees in the snow. Not in weakness, in relief. When he returned inside, Edith was asleep in the chair beside Gabriel's bed, her hand still resting on the boy's arm. In that moment, Josiah understood something deeper than necessity had brought them together. This was no longer an arrangement. This was devotion. Spring arrived slowly. Snow melted into streams. The mountains breathed again. One afternoon in April, Gabriel ran into the cabin holding a small carved piece of wood. "I made this," he said, handing it to Josiah. It was uneven and rough, but it was shaped like a small cabin. "For us," the boy added. Josiah's throat tightened. Edith watched the exchange quietly, and her brown eyes warm. That evening, as they sat around the table eating stew, Lily reached for Josiah's hand. "Papa," she said, without thinking. The words settled into the room gently. Josiah looked at Edith. She smiled. The town could whisper. The mountains could test them. Storms could come, and rivers could rise. But inside that cabin, built from rough wood and a question about kindness, something unbreakable had taken root. And Aspen Bend was beginning to see it. Spring in the mountains did not arrive gently. It came with rushing water and shifting earth. Snow melted fast, swelling the river that curved below Josiah's cabin. What had been quiet ice weeks before turned into a loud, restless force. One morning in late April, Josiah stepped outside and saw the water higher than he had ever seen it. That the river had eaten half the bank near the lower pasture. If it rose more, it would reach the edge of their land. He walked back inside, calm but alert. "The river is climbing," he said. Edith looked up from the stove. She did not panic. She never did. "What do we need to do?" "Move the livestock higher, stack sandbags near the garden, keep the children close." Gabriel stood straighter at once. "I can help." "You will," Josiah replied. By afternoon, the sky turned gray. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets. The river roared like something alive and angry. Water crept closer to the cabin with every passing hour. Inside, Lily clutched her rag doll tightly. Edith knelt in front of her. "Storms pass," she told her gently. "We stand together. That is how we face them." Outside, Josiah and Gabriel worked without stopping. Mud covered their boots. The boy slipped once, and Josiah caught him before he fell into the rushing edge. "Steady," Josiah said, gripping his shoulder. "Courage is not about being unafraid. It is about standing anyway." By nightfall, the river spilled over the lower pasture. Fences broke. A barrel floated past like driftwood. Water lapped at the edge of the yard. Josiah made a decision. "We move uphill," he said firmly. They gathered what mattered: blankets, food, the Bible, the photograph above the mantel. Edith wrapped it carefully and placed it in her bag without a word. The climb to higher ground was slow in the rain. Gabriel held Lily's hand. Josiah carried supplies. Edith walked beside them, steady as ever. From the hillside, they watched the river swallow the lower edge of their land. Lily pressed into Edith's side. "What will it take our home?" Edith looked at Josiah before answering. "Our home is not just wood," she said softly. "It is us." They waded through the night beneath a grove of pine trees. Rain eased near dawn. The river's roar softened. When the sun finally broke through the clouds, golden and bright, they walked back down. Water covered the yard. Mud coated the steps. But the cabin stood, solid, scarred, unmoved. Josiah stopped a few feet away, staring at it. He had built it with his hands years ago. He had thought strength meant thick beams and deep foundations. Now he understood something different. Strength meant 4 people standing in front of it together. They spent the next days rebuilding what the river had taken. Neighbors from Aspen Bend arrived with tools and extra boards, while men who had laughed in the saloon now worked beside Josiah without jokes. Mrs. Calloway brought hot bread and hugged Lily. Even the bartender showed up with supplies. Kindness spreads, just like cruelty once did. One evening, as the repairs neared completion, the town gathered outside the cabin. It was not a formal event. Frontier life did not allow for ceremony often, but word had spread about the flood and how the family had faced it. Judge Whitfield happened to be passing through again on his circuit. He stood among the crowd, observing quietly. Mrs. Calloway cleared her throat. "You built something strong up here, Josiah," she said. "Stronger than wood." Edith stepped closer to Josiah, their shoulders nearly touching. Gabriel stood tall beside him. Lily clutched his hand. Judge Whitfield looked at them and nodded. Some families are written by law," the judge said. "Others are written by choice. The second kind often last longer." The crowd murmured in agreement. Later that night, after everyone had gone, the 4 of them sat on the cabin steps watching the sunset spill across the mountains in bright gold. Gabriel leaned against Josiah's arm. "Papa," he said, looking toward the river, "are we staying here forever?" Josiah looked at Edith before answering. "If you wish to," he said gently. Lily rested her head in Edith's lap. "This is home," she said simply. Edith looked at the mountains, at the sky, at the cabin that had survived wind, winter, and water. Then she turned to Josiah. "Were you kind today?" she asked softly. He smiled, lines deepening around his pale blue eyes. "I tried." She reached for his hand and held it. "That is enough." The town that once laughed now told a different story. They spoke of the mountain man who asked for a wife in a saloon. They spoke of the widow who asked one question. They spoke of 2 children who found parents again. But what they remembered most was not the laughter or even the wedding. They remembered the question. Will you be kind? Because in a land where storms came without warning and rivers changed their course overnight, kindness was the one thing that held firm. And in a small cabin above Aspen Bend, built by scarred hands and guarded by gentle hearts, that kindness became a legacy that would outlast the river, the mountains, and even the memory of laughter. It became a family.